Welcome back to another episode of In Case You Missed It, this week in GovTech. The gang is back. It's been a busy week. We've had a lot of action. We wrapped up our State of GovTech event this week. We'll have a deeper recap on that at a future In Case You Missed It episode, but a fantastic event bringing together a diverse set of speakers from lots of different domains in an event that exposed a lot of great new emerging technologies with our CivStar partnership. So exciting to share more about that. But there's been a lot of news this week as well, so we'll go ahead and jump right into the landscape of news. One of the first announcements we're going to talk a little bit about that was broke yesterday was that Granicus is purchasing two companies, Open Cities and Bang the Table. These are well known within the GovTech market. We've had Open Cities on a number of In Case You Missed It in the past, so very exciting time for both of those companies. But really, it showed the importance from a market segment at collecting and engaging citizens in new ways. And so when you think about a lot of the citizen engagement technologies of the past, that were considered nice to have, it's becoming far more mission critical, especially in response to the pandemic, to have access to those technologies, to be able to gather and glean more insights from sentiment and social listening and everything else. In addition to the front end and the front door of government with the Open Cities dynamic with this. And so it was kind of a powerful combination of these technologies into the Granicus ecosystem. So really interesting to see that. Joe, I know this is something you've been tracking as well. What did you make of the announcement this week?
It's certainly interesting. You look at our CIO priorities pre-pandemic and hopefully nearing the post-pandemic. One thing that didn't really change was the focus on resident experience and government experience. And I think that this new notice here kind of identifies that. I mean, Granicus deepens their kind of tentacles into communication with Open Cities and Bang the Table. We saw the focus on the pandemic generating the importance on great citizen services and digital services. But we also know that now, as we see governments across the country saying, hey, these, City Hall is going to be virtual, meetings are going to be virtual, the opportunity to do civic engagement is much deeper to a much broader audience, and it's much more important. And I think now you're seeing with these tools, the opportunity to engage, collect, and inform is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And rather than just relying on traditional like B2B technologies to do that, or even B2C, now you've got the B2G specialized players in the market that are getting picked up. So lots of M&A activity. There's been over $700 million in capital raised by GovTech companies. I mean, these are companies that are just doing business with state and local government. So this market is hotter than ever. We're super excited to see everything that's happening here. And Joe, I guess we'll move on to you for the next piece. And this is something you actually had the chance to participate in today as a citizen of the state of California.
Yeah, no, quite interesting. I mean, today the California Department of Public Health and our Department of Technology announced a new digital vaccine record, totally voluntary, but a new website to go along with it, where it gives residents of California an option who have their traditional paper cards to get a digital copy of them. You can store them on your phone, and you can save photos of them, but it gives you a quick and easy way to access that information as we begin to reopen up. And they built it on an open source platform, which is pretty neat as well. And they join a growing consortium of states and nonprofits using this smart digital health card and QR code infrastructure, which maybe provides some greater flexibility as we look into other entities in the state and beyond.
Exciting stuff. Jed, what was on your radar this week?
Yeah, so we did a staff report at Government Technology about some reports that came from a company named Tutela. And what they do is that they have partnerships with different app makers, of dating apps and gaming apps and so on. And so they're able to get anonymous network quality data. And so what they were looking at is these different reports were comparing the 4G and 5G offerings from three major companies, T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. And basically, it was just asking the question, will users notice the difference when they get a 5G device or if they're connected to a 5G network? And interestingly, all three reports, no matter what company it was, they said that no, that more than likely users would not notice the difference when it comes to one specific category that they call excellent consistent quality. And the definition of that is how often a connection is able to support everyday use cases like 1080p video streaming, group HD video calls, or multiplayer online gaming. So across the board, no matter what company, they're saying that the 4G and the 5G are basically, performing roughly the same. Now, they did go into, Tutela does go into different indicators down in the reports. They do look at latency, for example. They also compare devices connected to 4G networks versus 5G networks, because, a 5G phone can be connected to a 4G network. They did find some differences there, some small differences as far as excellent quality is concerned. But they, again, said that it was so small of a difference that people probably wouldn't notice. Now, there was one category for T-Mobile in particular that really stood out, and that was download throughput. That was basically a 25% improvement when you go to 5G over 4G. But then they also point out, though, that even though you're seeing that big improvement, a lot of the everyday use cases don't even need that much download throughput. And now there was one consistent strength for 5G across the board, and that specific strength is basically not the connection not falling out, not basically the connection not going down to 1.5 megabits per second. The 5G networks in all three cases, no matter what company you're using, the 5G is always more reliable during peak times, and so the speed is not falling down dramatically during those times. But I guess the greater takeaway here is that obviously 5G has a lot of potential, and all of these reports talk about how when these companies start updating, the offerings are going to get a lot better. But we kind of have to temper our expectations. We can't expect the world to change instantly. We kind of have to wait for it to happen. And so anyone who's looking at these things as a solution, it's always a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It reminds me of the conversations when you started to see evolution in TV resolution, right? From 720 to 1080 to 4K to 8K, right? And when it comes down to it, people have a hard time distinguishing 4K to 8K, right? Because the resolution is just so good, the naked eye can't pick up on some of the changes. But I think there's some interesting things around 5G in government. It's a hot thing. We've heard a lot about it. Agencies are very interested in it. There's permitting implications for it. But I think there's some fundamental technology myths that are associated with the actual core tech itself. I mean, when you look at especially rural areas, 5G is not going to solve the rural broadband problem, because it actually requires a closer density and proximity for these kind of micro small cell towers to be placed, or your pizza boxes to be mounted on kind of every other block within a city. So I think there's a lot of things that are out there, and if you open your phone, you may see, hey, I got 5G, but it's ultra wideband 5G and millimeter wave, and other technologies are all different. Governing did a great piece that kind of breaks down some of the nuances of the tech, so we'll make that available in our show notes to everything afterwards. But this is a hot conversation because connectivity is definitely a major policy priority across the country, and rural areas that were left behind from investment and kind of bridging this digital divide are looking to anything and everything that they can grab to take a hold of this. Joe, what are you seeing on your side?
Well, that's a great transition to the article I saw in Ostenica this week, and to Jed's point about tempering expectations. As we looked at low orbit satellite, maybe one way to temper our expectations is to look at the fact that there's a thermal shutdown. I certainly didn't know about that, but once they hit 122 degrees Fahrenheit, they shut down. And one of their beta testers in Arizona learned that the hard way after not having connectivity for 7 hours. Jed and I sit here in the Sacramento region today where it's going to top out at 109 degrees. You begin to wonder, as we look at rural communities and communities in the West, how will low orbit satellites work in California, in Texas, in Arizona, when that's a norm, particularly ground temperature too, where these satellites are hosted? It's not going to take a lot of heat to get up to that 122 degrees and pose some significant challenges. So again, Jed, to your point, maybe it's time to temper expectations, but as we look at the broad suite of solutions that may be available to close some of these connectivity gaps.
And, Joe, to your point, you also have some communities in the South, rural communities in the South, where it can get up to 100 degrees. And so that could be an issue. Also, if I remember correctly, some of the money that Starlink got from the FCC, I think it's going toward an airport or two. And, airports also get really hot. When our scientists were trying to record average temperatures on the Earth, they used to keep thermometers at airports But I'm pretty sure that they moved those though, because it can give, it can make it seem like it's hotter than what it actually is. So that could be trouble if you're using satellite in an airport situation.
Agreed. And I think there's so much, that we need to look at when it comes to the different types of communication technologies and what they're most applicable for from a use case standpoint, because there can be confusions. And, also you've got to cut through some of the noise and some of the, hype factor that exists with some of the tech to really look at what are the practical use cases. How do you invest in it? How do you deploy it? Who's it most, optimized for? What use cases are there? It's exciting to see this landscape evolve and to think about self-driving cars and other types of technologies that are going to rely on having zero latency communication infrastructure behind it. So the foundation's being laid for that. But, it's like, what does that journey look like as we start to get into the rollout of some of these tech pieces?
Well, great. As you can tell, it was an exciting week in GovTech. We made it to another Friday. We want to thank you for joining Jed, Dustin, and I on this episode of In Case You Missed It. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.